Before we begin, I want you to take a breath, a long, deep breath. Let the noise of the world settle for just a moment. Because this story, this confession of mine, isn't just about family or betrayal. It's about identity, about what happens when the people we love most forget who we really are and try to rewrite the ending we've earned. If you've ever felt invisible, like your voice didn't matter anymore, I hope you'll stay with me to the end. And if it speaks to something deep in your soul, consider subscribing, because your story matters too. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller. I'm 72 years old, and I no longer recognize the woman I see in the mirror. Not because I'm older, not because of the gray hair I've grown to embrace, or the creases that frame my eyes like the pages of a well-read book. No, it's something else, something deeper. I used to see fire in those eyes, determination. Now, all I see is silence. I live alone in an old Victorian house nestled just outside Asheville, North Carolina, the kind with peeling white paint and a porch that groans under the weight of memory. Some people call it charming. I call it a mausoleum. Each room holds ghosts, of laughter that once echoed down the hallways, of dreams whispered over morning coffee, of love long since departed. Henry, my ex-husband, and I built this house together. He was a carpenter, a patient one, with a soft smile and the smell of cedar clinging to his clothes. We were married nearly 3 decades. But somewhere along the way, the sawdust settled, and the warmth between us turned cold. Our marriage ended, with more silence than shouting. He left when our daughter Rachel was just 17, and she chose him. I can't blame her, not entirely. Rachel had always been closer to her father. He was easygoing, generous with yeses. I, on the other hand, was all rules and structure, the one who said no when it mattered most. Especially when it came to that boy she thought she couldn't live without. I didn't know it then, but trying to protect her from him would cost me everything. Rachel left with Henry after the divorce, and for years I didn't hear from her, just whispers. From mutual friends, she moved to Portland, worked at a yoga studio, maybe bartended for a while. I didn't know. I stopped asking. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up at my front door again, 13 years later. 33 years old, no job, no apartment, no plan. I should have hesitated, should have remembered how she once looked at me, like I was the enemy. But when I opened that door and saw her, same hazel eyes, same defiant tilt of her chin, I felt something loosen in my chest. Hope, maybe? Mom, she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. Can I stay here for a while? And I said yes. Of course I said yes. She moved in like a gust of wind, bringing with her bags, boxes, and a restless energy that didn't belong in my still, ordered world. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that she just needed time to get back on her feet, that maybe, just maybe, we'd find a way back to each other. But it didn't take long before the cracks began to show. The once empty kitchen now echoed with her late-night rummaging. The scent of cigarette smoke clung to the cushions of the armchair I used to read in, and the silence that had once been my refuge was now replaced with tension so thick it hovered like fog. Then came the moment I thought would help her regain her footing. When I handed her the keys to my car, it was a gesture of faith, a way to say, I trust you again. But trust is a fragile thing. And that Friday night, when she returned with the side of my car dented and scraped, and a shrug in place of an apology, I felt something inside me fracture, something that had already been hanging by a thread. I'll tell you what happened next, but only if you're ready to hear how far a mother can be pushed before she finally decides to stop saving everyone but herself. The sound of the engine sputtering into the driveway was the first sign something was wrong. Remember glancing up from the book I was pretending to read in the living room, its pages untouched, my mind restless, and hearing the slow, scraping crunch of metal. A pause, then the car door slamming shut. I waited for footsteps. Nothing. Just the creak of the porch boards and the click of the front door opening like it had 1,000 times before. Rachel didn't even look at me as she passed through the hallway. "Hey," she said flatly, and I caught a whiff of cheap perfume and alcohol on her clothes. I followed her with my eyes, and then, with a knot tightening in my gut, I stood up and stepped outside. The porch light flickered overhead, another thing I'd been meaning to fix, but it was bright enough to reveal the damage. A deep dent curled around the back door like a fist had gripped the frame. Long scratches ran down the side of the car like someone had dragged keys through it in anger. My heart sank. It wasn't just a car. It was the one thing I had bought for myself after the divorce. A sleek navy blue Ford sedan, simple and elegant. A quiet declaration that I could still own something beautiful. And now it looked like a wreck left behind on the side of a highway. I stood there for a moment, my fingers trembling, the evening air pressing against my chest like a weight. I could hear the distant hum of crickets. The smell of gasoline still lingered faintly around the vehicle. Inside the house, the TV clicked on. I walked in, careful not to slam the door, though every muscle in my body begged me to. Rachel was sitting on the couch, feet tucked under her, staring blankly at the screen. "What happened to the car?" I asked, my voice calm but strained. She didn't flinch, didn't look at me. "Some guy backed into it. Not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" My voice cracked on the last word. "Rachel, the rear panel is smashed in. The paint's ruined, and you didn't think to, what? Leave a note? Tell me immediately? Apologize?" She finally looked at me, eyes half-lidded. No shame, no urgency. I said it wasn't a big deal. My chest tightened. "It is to me." She rolled her eyes, pushing off the couch like gravity annoyed her. "It's just a car, Mom. You act like someone died." "It's not just a car," I said, louder now. "It's something I worked for. Something I earned. Something I was proud of." She laughed under her breath. "You always do this. Make everything about you. You're so dramatic." The slap never came, not with my hand, but her words hit me like one. "I'm dramatic?" I repeated, stunned. "Rachel, I gave you a home when you had nowhere else to go. I gave you the keys to something precious, and you come back like this, careless, indifferent, like none of it matters." She turned on me then, slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You know what your problem is? You never trusted me. Not when I was a kid, not now. You always needed control. Maybe that's why Dad left." There it was, the poison she had been holding on to for years. My lips parted, but no words came. Just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears and the hollow hum of the ceiling fan overhead. She walked past me without another glance. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs, and I stood alone in the living room, clutching the back of the armchair like it was the only thing anchoring me to the floor. How had we come to this? How had love turned into something so brittle, so sharp? That night, I sat in bed, unable to sleep. The old floor heater ticked with every shift in temperature. I stared at the ceiling, the cracks in the plaster like veins in an aging face. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I was humiliated, not because of the car, not even because of what she said, but because I had let her back in. Because deep down, I had hoped this would be our second chance, and now I saw it clearly. Hope can be dangerous, especially when it's only going one way. The morning after the car incident felt unusually quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Even the birds outside seemed reluctant to sing, as if they sensed the tension buried in the floorboards and walls. I moved through the kitchen, like a ghost, barefoot, careful not to let the worn wooden planks creak beneath me. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and bitter, but it did nothing to soothe me. I held the warm mug in my hands, like it could somehow bring back a sense of peace I no longer knew how to feel. Rachel came downstairs an hour later, dressed, in one of my old sweatshirts, her eyes swollen from sleep or tears. I couldn't tell. She didn't say good morning. Just made her way to the counter, poured herself a cup of coffee, and leaned silently against the sink. We stood there for a moment, mother and daughter, strangers in the same room. I broke the silence first. "Do you even care what happened last night?" She didn't turn. I said I was sorry. "No, Rachel," I said, the words sharper than I intended. "You didn't. You shrugged. You rolled your eyes. You dismissed me like I was just noise." She turned around slowly, the mug cradled in her palms. "Because that's what it always turns into with you. A lecture, a guilt trip. You can't just let things go." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a slap. I set my mug down, my hands trembling slightly. "Let things go?" I echoed, incredulous. "You crash my car, you barely acknowledge the damage, and I'm supposed to just let it go?" "It's a car, Mom," she snapped, slamming her mug on the counter. "Not a person, not your identity, just a car." I took a deep breath. My eyes stung, but I refused to cry. "You know what hurts the most?" I said quietly. "Not the dented bumper or the shattered mirror. It's realizing that the little girl I once held in my arms, who used to draw me crayon hearts and tell me I was her hero, now looks at me like I'm nothing but a burden." Her jaw clenched. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this about you being the victim." That stopped me. For a second, I couldn't speak. "Rachel," I said, my voice trembling, "I've spent my whole life putting you first. Every decision I made, staying in that marriage too long, giving up my job, rebuilding everything after the divorce, I did all of it so you'd have something stable, something safe. And now you treat me like I'm in your way, like I'm something to outgrow." Her face was unreadable. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret? Pain? I couldn't tell. She turned and walked out of the room without a word. And that's when I knew. Something had to change. Later that day, I sat in the sunroom, my favorite part of the house, with its tall windows and aging wicker furniture. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor. I used to sit here with a book and forget the world for a while, but not today. I stared out at the garden, the camellias blooming despite the frost. They reminded me of myself, still standing, still blooming, even when the cold tried to break me. That's when the thought first came to me. What if I sold the house? It felt like betrayal at first. This house had been my sanctuary, the one place I thought I still had control, but what was it now? Just a battleground, a place where I was no longer seen, no longer heard, no longer safe. I felt a chill go down my spine, even though the room was warm. Selling the house would mean reclaiming something, not just space, but power, dignity, freedom. I didn't make the decision that day, but something inside me shifted. I was done being the one who always compromised. Done waiting for my daughter to wake up and see me again. If she wanted to believe I was controlling, fine, then I would show her what control really looked like. That night, sleep never came. I lay still under the thick quilt my grandmother had made decades ago, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling like ghosts pacing overhead. The house groaned with its usual nighttime sounds, pipes expanding, wood settling, the occasional pop from the old radiator, but something in me felt different. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I was awake. It was just after 6 a.m. when I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and placed my feet on the cold wooden floor. The sun hadn't risen yet, but I moved like I had waited for this moment my entire life. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon, a memory Not a reality. There was no one baking, no sweet comfort rising from the oven. Just the echo of mornings long gone. I opened the laptop that had been collecting dust on the side table and stared. At the blinking cursor, my fingers hesitated, hovering above the keyboard. And then I began typing. Real estate agents near me. It felt wrong, disloyal, like I was betraying something sacred. But it also felt liberating. The first call I made was to a woman named Denise Holloway, recommended on a neighborhood Facebook group I hadn't visited in years. Her voice was warm and direct. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "If you're ready, I'll walk you through it." And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. When Rachel woke up late that morning and wandered into the kitchen still wrapped in sleep and silence, I was already dressed. Hair done, lipstick on, not for anyone but me. She blinked, surprised. "You're up early." "I had some calls to make," I replied, stirring my tea. "I've made a decision." She raised an eyebrow, already defensive. "About what?" "The house." She froze. "What about the house?" I met her eyes. "I'm selling it." The words fell into the room like a hammer. Rachel laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You're joking." "I'm not." "You're selling this house?" "Where are you going to go?" "I haven't decided yet," I said calmly. "But I need a fresh start. This place is no longer mine, not in the way it used to be." She stared at me, and I watched her expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, something close to panic. "You can't just... This is our home." "No, Rachel," I said gently. "It was my home. I let you back in because I wanted to believe we still had something left. But all you've done is remind me how much I've lost." Her mouth opened, then closed again. I continued, my voice steady. "You have 1 month. You need to find work, start saving. After that, you'll have to figure out your next step." "You're serious," she whispered. "I've never been more serious in my life." For a moment, she looked like a child. Again, small, lost. And then the armor slid back over her face. "So you're just throwing me out? After everything?" "No, I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference." She stormed off. The door slammed. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I went to the sunroom and sat in the chair by the window, watching the sky begin to shift from gray to amber. The light caught on the glass, refracting into warm, golden streaks across the room. And I wept. Not from sadness, from release. It was the first time in years that I had done something entirely for myself, not for Rachel, not for Henry, not for appearances or guilt or the ever-churning ache of motherhood. Just for me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew finally that I wasn't staying. The days that followed felt like I was living inside a storm that hadn't yet broken. Rachel barely spoke to me. Her footsteps were louder than usual, her presence colder. The house, once filled with unbearable silence, now buzzed with an invisible tension. It clung to the walls, settled into the cushions, drifted into the corners like dust you can't ever quite clean. But I didn't retreat. I had spent too many years walking on eggshells in my own home, sacrificing my peace just to avoid setting. Her off. No more. I brewed my tea in the morning with my favorite mug. I played my records in the afternoon. Etta James, Nina Simone, voices of women who had carried heartbreak and still stood tall. And in the evenings, I sat in the garden, letting the air wrap around me like an old shawl, reminding me that I still existed. Rachel, meanwhile, disappeared into her room like it was a bunker. She emerged only to eat, to scowl, to tap her phone with quick, angry fingers. I could feel her judgment every time she looked at me, as if I had betrayed some unspoken contract between mother and daughter. But that contract had already been broken. She just hadn't noticed. Then, a week after I announced my decision, the Phone rang. I recognized the number the moment I saw it. Henry, I should have let it go to voicemail. But old habits die hard. Hello? I answered, my voice clipped. Eleanor. His voice was rougher than I remembered. Slower, like time had worn him down too. We need to talk about Rachel. I swallowed. What about her? She called me, said you're kicking her out, that you're selling the house, that you're unwell. I let out a breath, sharp, controlled. So she ran to you. Of course she did. She's worried, he said. No, Henry, I corrected. She's losing control. That's not the same thing. There was a pause. Then, carefully, she thinks you need help, that you might be confused, maybe showing signs of, don't, I interrupted. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Eleanor, I'm just saying. You weren't here, I snapped, suddenly shaking. You left. You left me to raise her alone. You don't get to weigh in now, not after all these years. Another pause. She's talking about having you evaluated, legally. The words hit me like a slap. I gripped the phone tighter, my breath coming fast. My ears rang. She what? She said you've been erratic, impulsive, that maybe you're not thinking clearly. And you believed her? She's scared. She's manipulating you, I said, low and fierce. Like she's manipulated me, like she always has. Eleanor, he said, softer now. I'm not trying to take sides. You already did, years ago. And I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand, landing softly on the rug. I sat there, in the living room, the ticking of the old clock suddenly louder than it had ever been, and I felt something boil inside me that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. Rage. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that simmers, the kind that makes you clear-eyed and dangerous. They wanted to paint me as senile, unstable, weak. They wanted to take my house, my dignity, myself. But I had been underestimated for far too long. That night, I called a lawyer. Her name was Teresa Caldwell, mid-50s, tough, with a voice that cut through doubt like a knife through silk. I explained everything, the car, the threats, the conversation with Henry, the looming storm. We're going to fight this, she said. I've seen this before. Adult children and exes trying to declare someone incompetent just to get their hands on what isn't theirs. But they picked the wrong woman this time. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not out of joy, out of clarity. Let them try to take me down. I was ready to stand taller than I ever had before. If there's one thing no one tells you about reclaiming your life, it's how much paperwork is involved. Bank statements, medical records, letters from friends, receipts, photos, calendars, everything that could prove, on paper, what I already knew in my bones. I was of sound mind. I was in control. And I wasn't going to let anyone erase me. Teresa, my lawyer, was relentless, precise. She handed me a list of tasks, deadlines, contacts, and I met each one with a calm determination I hadn't felt in decades. It was strange. Here I was, 72 years old, finally learning how to protect myself, not with softness or sacrifice, but with strategy, with fire. And all the while, Rachel floated through the house like nothing had changed, except everything had. She still avoided me, still tapped on her phone with those same fast, irritated fingers. But now there was something else in her eyes, an unease, a flicker of suspicion. She knew I was planning something. She just didn't know what. One evening, I came home from a meeting with Teresa and found Rachel in the kitchen, arms crossed, leaning against the fridge. Her eyes were red, but her voice was hard. You're trying to cut me out. No, I said quietly, setting down my purse. I'm trying to take my life back. You're being paranoid, and you're being careless, I replied. She scoffed. You've changed, Mom. You're distant, angry. You're not the woman I remember. I stepped closer, slowly. until the space between us felt charged with everything we hadn't said in years. "No," I whispered. "I'm the woman you forgot to remember." She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I'm the woman who stayed up every night when you didn't come home, who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, who gave up everything to give you a chance, and you look at me like I'm some broken antique." "Mom, I am not broken," I said, my voice shaking now. "But I am done." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rachel turned and walked out of the room, and for the first time, I didn't follow. Later that night, I stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing out my hair. My hands moved slowly, the bristles catching in the day, soft silver strands. And I studied my reflection, not with judgment, but with recognition. There were lines now. The skin around my eyes had softened, but the gaze that met mine was steady, fierce, alive. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't crazy. I was just tired. Tired of pretending I didn't notice the way they had started talking about me in the third person. Tired of their whispers, their plotting, their quiet condescension. But exhaustion wasn't weakness. It was warning, and I was finally listening. The next morning I was in the garden, knees in the soil, hands dirty with the scent of rosemary and loam, when Teresa called. "The court." "Date is set," she said. "When?" "Next Thursday. Be ready." I hung up and sat back on my heels, the sun warm on my back. Birds chirped nearby. A breeze moved through the wind chimes on the porch, scattering music through the air. And for a moment, I didn't feel fear. I felt something older than fear. Resolve. I wiped the dirt from my palms and stood slowly, stretching, breathing in deeply. Let them try. Let them bring their lawyers, their accusations, their smug certainty. I knew who I was. I had nothing to prove. But I would prove it anyway, not for them, for me. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling. The walls were beige, sterile, lined with wooden pews that smelled faintly of polish and old varnish. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like anxious thoughts, constant and inescapable. And the air, it was heavy, like judgment itself had already settled into the room. I sat at the long oak table beside Teresa, my hands folded in my lap. She was reviewing her notes with calm precision. I, on the other hand, was trying to steady my breathing. Rachel sat across from me, her hair pinned neatly back, dressed in a pale pink blazer that didn't suit her. She wouldn't look at me, not once. And beside her, Henry. He hadn't aged as gracefully as I had hoped. His once confident posture now sagged just slightly, his jaw more jowled, but his eyes were still sharp, calculating. I could feel the heat of them on me even as he feigned concern. He looked like a man who thought this would be over quickly, like a man who had already decided the ending. But I had other plans. The judge entered without fanfare. An older man with silver hair and eyes like river stones, cool, unreadable. He glanced between us, settled in his chair, and said simply, "Let's begin." Their lawyer spoke first, and I listened as they tried to dismantle me piece by piece. They called me erratic. They said I had made impulsive decisions, that I had isolated myself, neglected repairs, and made a rash decision to sell the house. They described a woman they claimed was no longer capable of reasoned judgment. I barely recognized her, but I saw how the judge's eyes narrowed, how he scribbled notes, how he looked at me, at my gray hair, at my hands. He's trying to decide if I'm fading. Then Teresa stood, straight and composed, and said 5 words that changed the room. "Ms. Miller." "Would like to speak." I rose slowly. The courtroom tilted slightly, not from nerves, but from weight, from the pressure of holding all of this in for too long. I stepped forward, my shoes clicking softly against the floor. And as I took my place at the witness stand, I looked at Rachel. I looked at Henry. And then I faced the judge. "My name is Eleanor Miller," I began, voice trembling only slightly, "and I am not losing my mind. A beat. My daughter and ex-husband would have you believe I'm unstable, that I'm unfit to manage my own life, but the truth is, I'm finally managing it for the first time in years." I could feel Rachel flinch. For decades, I put everyone before me. My marriage, my child, their comfort, their choices. I let myself disappear, one day at a time. And when I finally drew a line, when I finally said enough, they didn't recognize me. Because the version of me they prefer is silent, compliant, invisible. I paused. Let the words breathe. I sold my house because I wanted a fresh start. I consulted a lawyer. I organized my finances. I have no history of mental illness. I am lucid. I am careful. I am aware. I looked at the judge then, straight into his eyes. What I am not is weak. There was silence, not awkward, not confused, respectful. Teresa asked no questions. She didn't need to. I had said it all. Their lawyer tried to rattle me with cross-examination, asking about dates, emotional decisions, the stress of aging. But I didn't waver. "Are you lonely, Ms. Miller?" he asked, smug. I smiled. "Sometimes, but that's not the same as being incapable." By the end of the hearing, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not because I knew what the judge would decide, but because for the first time I had told my story, my truth, without apology, and that was freedom. The ruling came the next morning. The courtroom was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not heavy, not fearful, just waiting. The judge read his notes with measured patience, as though each word held the weight of someone's entire life. And in a way, it did. After hearing the testimony and reviewing the evidence, he said, "The court finds no basis to declare Ms. Eleanor Miller unfit. She retains full legal authority over her finances, property, and personal decisions." I exhaled. Not just relief. Victory. Rachel lowered her eyes. Henry's jaw tensed, but I didn't look at them. I was too busy reclaiming myself. We stood, Teresa and I, gathering our things with quiet grace. She leaned in and whispered, "You did it." I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked out of that courthouse taller than I'd walked in. The days that followed were oddly peaceful, not because everything was fixed, but because the war was over. Rachel stayed distant for a while. I didn't press her. I had learned to stop reaching for people who weren't reaching back. But one evening, I found her in the sunroom, my sunroom, holding a dusty box filled with old photographs. She looked up as I entered, her face softer than I had seen in years. "I found these in the attic," she said. "I thought maybe we could look through them together." I paused, then sat down beside her. We sifted through the memories in silence. A picture of her on her first day of school, another of me, younger, hair wild from wind, holding her at the beach, her laughter frozen in time. My eyes still bright. She held one up and smiled, just a little. "You were beautiful back then." I looked at her, then at the photo. "I still am." She nodded. "Yeah, you are." And in that moment, for the first time, I saw not just my daughter, but a woman trying to find her way, stumbling, misguided, but human, like me. She got a job a few weeks later. A small bookstore near the edge of town. Nothing glamorous, but honest. She started coming home earlier, cooking her own meals, leaving the dishes rinsed in the sink. I didn't praise her. I just let her grow, and she did. Not perfectly, not quickly. But steadily. And me? I didn't sell the house after all. I thought I would. I meant to. But something shifted in me after that courtroom. I realized it wasn't the house that suffocated me. It was the silence, the lack of respect, the weight of being unseen. Now that I had my voice back, this house could be mine again. Truly, mine. I still take my tea in the garden most mornings, the rosemary's blooming again, the camellias too. And some days, when the sun hits the porch just right, I can feel the warmth of something not quite forgiveness, but peace. I don't know what comes next, but I know this. I am not weak. I am not crazy. I am not a burden. I am a woman who survived the slow erosion of her identity and found herself again in the quiet act of saying no, of standing still, of walking out whole. To every woman listening, reading, or remembering this story, you don't have to shout to reclaim your worth. Sometimes the most powerful kind of strength is the kind that whispers, "No more. You are not too old, not too late, not too broken. Your story isn't over. In fact, maybe it's just beginning." If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, because your voice matters, your dignity matters, and your quiet victories, they deserve to be heard. Thank you for walking this road with me, and never forget, you are still you, and that is more than enough.